All right, welcome back to another episode of the Podium Pusher podcast with Justin and Brandon. Unfortunately, today it is just Justin. Brandon is in the middle of moving everything he owns from an apartment to a house. So we are giving him the day off today. Just me to break down the Spanish Grand Prix, but don't worry. There's a lot to talk about. The first race of a triple header sure did provide us a lot of action, maybe more action than we're used to having in Spain, which is why my one sentence rundown for this weekend is that Spain might be a better track than we thought. Obviously, a couple years ago, Spain was a track that everyone hated, and I totally understand why. Personally, I didn't like it much myself. Anytime it came up in my season on the F1 game, I was like, can we skip this and move it along to the next one? Realistically, that was just because we had so much testing at Spain, and all these teams had so much data from Spain. They knew what the tire deg was going to be like. They knew what their performance was going to be like. They knew what their run plan would be. And Spain was just a procession. And that stupid chicane in the final, right before the final corner, just ruined any overtakes on the straight, anyways. And it would be a DRS train, and there would be like three more overtakes at Spain than you would see in Monaco. And it's just an awful race. They got rid of that chicane, which made the track a little bit better. Obviously, these regulations are supposed to be better for following. I think they've helped a little bit at Spain. We've seen better racing at that track in this regulation than we saw in past regulations, but there really were overtakes up and down the field this race. It wasn't a ton, there wasn't a crazy amount of overtakes, but personally, I think of Daniel Ricciardo making up a lot of places at the end of the race. He came from about 19th to 15th at the end of the race, so there was some overtaking there. There was fighting between Oscar Piastri and Sergio Perez trying to move up the field a little bit from where they qualified. You had passing at the front of the field with George Russell getting by at turn one and Max and Lando both having to get by him. Lando being on his alternative strategy that caused him to overtake some cars to try and get to Max. So we saw overtaking at this track, which is something we're not used to seeing at Spain. But also, there were two-stop strategies this race, and I think those are always a great thing when they happen. I think we've become so used to one-stop races that I truly don't believe that we're going to see a two-stop when they say two-stop. Like, I fully believed when Lando extended that first stint that he was going to go on the hard tires and it's going to be a one-stop. And I was like, I can't believe we're about to see a one-stop race at Spain, which is a very high-speed track, got even more high speed. And so there should be heavy tire wear. And I'm glad we saw two-stop races. Obviously, that means there's an opportunity for different strategies at the front of the field. We saw that with Lando Norris doing something a little different to Max Verstappen. Sure, it didn't pan out at the end, but there was suspense in a different way in this race than you would see in other races. Obviously, there are other tracks on the calendar, even last time out in Canada, where we saw overtakes for the lead multiple times in the race, and that can be a form of action. But I think there's something to be said for a strategy race where what teams do in the pit lane and on the pit wall having an effect on the outcome of the race. And I think that's what we saw this weekend in Spain. So, Spain, for sure, not the best track on the calendar, still in the bottom half for sure, but it does provide some action, maybe in a way that we're not used to. And so, Spain might just be a little bit better than we thought it was. I personally am still looking forward to the Madrid track. I think it will be better than the current circuit that we race at in Spain. Obviously, my hopes aren't super high for Madrid because every time F1 keeps adding these street tracks in big cities, they're not guaranteed to be good races. So I'm cautiously optimistic. At least it will be good for the sake of change and trying something different than Barcelona. But we'll see. I'm excited for Madrid either way. All right, let's move into some questions from different things that happened in this Grand Prix weekend. Starting with our first question, is it Lando versus Max for the championship? After this weekend, we saw Lando Norris move into P2 in the driver standings. He's still 69 points behind, which is a massive gap. And part of me is like, that gap is too big. I don't think that it can be overcome. But I don't want to be pessimistic. There's still quite a bit of the season left. We have these two more races in the triple header coming up, and I personally would favor Lando Norris at those races. I think Lando Norris in Austria is quite the combination. We've seen him perform well in the past. I think of 2020, it's where he got his first podium, and last year that was where McLaren really started to turn their season around. Lando Norris got a podium there after being the first one to receive the upgrades, and so I would favor Lando Norris at Austria. I think Silverstone could also be a great performance for Lando Norris. Lando probably should have won this race. I think he lost too much time in traffic. I think back to 2021, I thought about that race a lot. during this past weekend's Grand Prix at Spain and how Lewis Hamilton made that strategy work to beat Max Verstappen. Those cars were so far ahead of the rest of the field that he had the gap to do that. He just got let by his teammate and then went and chased Max down. Because the cars are so close right now, Lando Norris had to drive through traffic to get to Max Verstappen. And I think that hindered them in the strategy. Had that traffic not been there, had he not been stuck behind George Russell, we probably would have seen a closer finish. Obviously, Lando Norris was faster at the end, which gives us hope for a continued title fight in the future. But right now, it does look like it really is going to turn into Lando versus Max for the championship. I do think McLaren has the strongest package overall, and we've just seen them fall short a little bit the past couple of weekends. But like I said, I do favor them the next two rounds. We'll see how that turns out. If they can leave this triple header winning two out of the three races, especially if Max doesn't finish second, that would completely change the championship around in my mind. And then I also think Oscar Piastri had a pretty poor weekend in Spain. I predicted him to win, so I guess I'm not super surprised by the poor weekend because that's what happens when I predict people to win. But yeah, I think Spain being a high tire degradation track, I should have known Oscar Piastri was going to do terrible there, and he messed up the qualifying lap, and that was on his own, and kind of ruined his race from there because you can't make too many overtakes at Spain. I know I talked about there being some, but it's still not like you're coming through the field at Monza or Spa or something. And so the season is long, still a lot of time to go. But I think if Oscar Piastri turns it around, I think McLaren have a great shot in the Constructors' Championship. And then also, I think if Lando can come out on top of those next two races, then the Drivers' Championship is not off for sure. I think there's still plenty of time left in the season. We've seen unreliability from that Red Bull already this season. I know it was a long time ago, but there's a chance it happens again. We can have hope for the sake of a championship battle. But yeah, right now I would definitely say that it's going to look like Lando versus Max for the rest of the year if I had to guess. Moving on to our next question, are Mercedes back? They truly looked like the third fastest team over Ferrari this weekend. It was really good to see Lewis back on the podium, which is something that I never thought I would say as a Formula One fan. There was definitely a time in the beginning of the turbo hybrid era that I could never see Lewis Hamilton stand on a podium again, and I would be totally fine with that. But now, after this winning drought that he has had, and then the start to the year that he's had with Mercedes, with it being his last season, I'm glad he's found some success and gotten back on the podium. Very similar weekend that we've seen from Mercedes, like we've seen in the past, just the pattern of Lewis having the better racecraft and better race pace than George. Obviously, Lewis got the preferable strategy. I think him being on the soft tire versus George being on the hard tire at the end played in his favor. What a move from George around the outside at turn one to get the lead. Obviously, it was very short-lived. He was caught up by Max and Lando eventually, but great move from him. I thought that Mercedes were probably in a great place to win the race based on them having both their drivers there and them usually showing better race pace in qualifying. Unfortunately, they were a little farther back than I expected, but it wasn't miles off. They were fairly close. I think Lewis was like 10 seconds at the flag, maybe 12 seconds, which isn't too bad. And he said in the cool down room, if he had a better start and didn't fall behind one of the Ferraris at the beginning, that it would have been closer. So I think great performance from Lewis, great performance from Mercedes. Bringing home a 3-4 is great for them. Great in the Constructors' Championship. Brandon and I said when we were talking about it, if Mercedes are too far out of the Constructors' standings to win. And my response was, yeah, probably they're a little too far back, but I definitely wouldn't say that they're locked in to P4 in the constructor standings, especially if they keep having races like this. And this looked like the Mercedes of old, just a solid weekend, not making strategy errors, putting it all together, probably getting the maximum amount of points that their car could bring home this weekend. And so if they keep putting together races like this, I see no reason why they couldn't start to get into that constructors battle. And maybe I did write them off too soon. Maybe we could see them fighting for P1 in that constructors battle at the end of the year. I have talked about in the past that the Formula One calendar is too full. But with this many races, there's truly still a lot of time for things to happen in the drivers and the constructors battle. Obviously, I think the drivers are too far out of the drivers battle for sure. But I think we could see that team get back into the constructors battle, and I would not be surprised if Mercedes ended the season in P2 or P3 instead of P4. So yeah, Mercedes, they truly could be back. Oh, Ferrari, they are the topic of our next question. What on earth happened to those Ferrari upgrades? Simply, they didn't work. Ferrari brought some upgrades that they had rushed this weekend, and they just were off the pace. I think they truly were the fourth fastest car to bring home a fifth and sixth place position. They should feel great about that, I guess, given the pace of their car that they could finish in front of a Red Bull and a McLaren. That's good for them. That keeps them in the constructors battle. But I think they should feel pretty bad right now, especially if you're a Ferrari fan. You shouldn't be feeling great. After the high of Monaco getting a double podium, seeing Charles win, and then Canada immediately right into the dumps. And then this weekend, they rush some upgrades. They're hoping to be quicker than Mercedes again. And in my mind, I thought they were. I thought Charles would be fighting for a podium. I was hoping Carlos Sainz would have a great home Grand Prix, and then they have some teammate drama and are off the pace of Mercedes. Just not what you want to see. It's kind of looking like a two-tiered constructors fight right now. We're saying Red Bull versus McLaren, and then Ferrari versus Mercedes for that 3-4 position. And so, yeah, I think Ferrari will do better in Austria. I think their car will suit that track better than it did Spain. We've seen Charles Leclerc win in Austria in the past, but at the moment, I can't see them being any faster than the third fastest team on the grid. I think they're solidly behind McLaren and Red Bull, and that's where I pegged them anyways. That's where I thought they were going to be. But now that Mercedes are in the mix, it's hard to see them in front of them too. So maybe they'll be the fourth fastest team still. I don't know. I think we're in a great place right now with Formula One. We have no idea who is going to be where in the finishing order in the performance when we show up to a weekend, which is a great place to be. We were sitting at Bahrain this year, seeing Max Verstappen drive off into the distance and Sergio Perez gapping the rest of the field as well. And so to go into every weekend and not know the pecking order is absolutely perfect. It's wonderful. I think Formula One is in a really good spot, but Ferrari not in a great spot at the moment, unfortunately. But I do think they'll be better in Austria for sure, and I wouldn't write them off for the season as well. All right, we're gonna rapid fire through some other notable moments during the Grand Prix, during the whole weekend, just because a lot happened in this race. And I don't want you guys to be in the comments being like, Justin, you didn't talk about Kevin Magnussen. I'm sorry he finished like third to last in a Haas. I don't know what to say to you. Anyways, both Alpines in the points. Great for them. Pierre had the much better weekend, which he's kind of starting to get into a rhythm of pretty soundly beating Esteban Ocon, which is what we expected him to do moving into the season based on the performance he had last year. So Alpine bringing home 2 points finishes is great for them. Pierre probably would have finished in front of Sergio Perez if his team didn't absolutely mess up that pit stop. But yeah, great weekend from Alpine. Could have brought home some more points. I know Pierre would have loved to bring home 4 points instead of two, but in all realities, an Alpine losing out to a Red Bull is not that big of a deal. It's something we would fully expect to happen. So not too upset with Pierre for that. But double points for Alpine, looking like they are the fifth fastest car in the grid. They were soundly ahead of Aston Martin, who also has upgraded this year. I don't know what to say about them. 2 years in a row, we've seen them fall off a cliff when they start trying to make their car better. But yeah, great weekend from Alpine. Speaking of Sergio Perez, oof, still not performing well enough. It is unfortunate that P8 is an upgrade for him to where he's been performing in the past, but it's still not good enough. And I know you're saying, oh, Justin, the Red Bull isn't the fastest car and he did a three-stop. I don't care. He qualified P8, and yes, he held Max, but still wasn't great in qualifying. Had the grid penalty, started P11. He should have finished higher than P8. He should not have spent the entire race racing B carbs and Aston Martins and Alpines. So finishing a minute behind your teammate, even with an extra stop, is just unbelievable. You take away the stop, and he's still like 35, 40 seconds down the road to Max Verstappen and almost losing to an Alpine. Like if he had finished behind Pierre, that would have been brutal. We would have seen Red Bull not score the most points in the weekend. And so, yeah, Sergio Perez still not performing well. I've said it all already. I don't have anything else to say. Hopefully he gets booted from that seat soon. But until that happens, I don't know what else to say. I've said it all. He shouldn't have gotten that contract. They shouldn't have done it this soon. I don't know, just rough weekend from Sergio Perez for sure. VCarb also had a pretty rough weekend. They had some upgrades, did not pan out. They were one of the slowest cars on the grid, qualified P17 and P18. Daniel Ricciardo made up some ground during the race, showed off some good pace and good tire degradation throughout the Grand Prix. So that was awesome to see. Too bad it was for a P15 finish. And then Yuki Tsunoda, he was dealing with some pretty heavy tire wear, ended up making an extra stop, finishing P19. So rough weekend for VCarb. I remember when we were saying they were going to be great this season, and it hasn't happened yet, but we'll see if they can turn it around for the rest of the triple headers. They're another team who I think will be better suited for Austria, and then I'm not super confident about their prospects at Silverstone, but we'll have to see. Hopefully, they can turn it around a little bit. Stake benefited from VCarb being awful because they didn't look like the worst team in the grid. They both made it into Q2. Williams looked terrible this weekend, and so that might be a good thing for Stake if they're truly trying to win the services of Carlos Sainz and Williams are their competition for that. If we can leave this triple header and Stake looks like the better organization, looks like they're headed in a better direction than Williams, then maybe that'll be enough to persuade Carlos Sainz to sign with them. I did read this morning. I don't know how credible it was. I didn't really look into the source of this information. I heard Carlos Sainz has reportedly been offered by Alpine, which is crazy. I would say that's probably a better seat. Obviously, Alpine, we've made a lot of jokes about them in the past, but I mean, they looked good this weekend. They've been in an upward trajectory this season. Like, yeah, you can say they started the season out as maybe the worst car, but their upgrades have worked. They've been moving in the right direction, and now they've scored races or scored points 3 races in a row. So maybe that's where Pierre Gasly will end up. But Stake, good job on them. They've looked pretty horrid the past couple of races. So for them to turn it around this weekend was good to see. Still didn't score any points. Still been a rough season for them for sure. But good for Stake. Didn't look like the worst team. Progress is better than no progress. That's what we always say here at the Podium Pushers. Speaking of Podium Pusher, my Podium Pusher of the weekend is Max Verstappen. It can be no one else. And I know we're seeing a Max Verstappen win, and it's so easy to say Podium Pusher of the weekend, but he's truly had to fight for these past 2 wins he's got. He continues to win in a car that probably isn't the best one on the grid. He drove an incredible race. I know he didn't leave turn one with a lead, but he left turn one in front of Lando Norris and managed to get by George Russell. And that move probably won him the race, being able to put that gap in that car between him and Lando. And then that ended up being the 4 seconds at the end of the race that he had in his pocket. So, what a race from Max Verstappen, truly showing that he is one of, if not the best driver on the grid. Just been driving very well recently, and he's got to be my podium pusher of the weekend. Back marker of the weekend, I'm going for a team here. It's got to be Williams. They had no pace. They qualified P19 and 20. Alex ended up in the gravel at some point. Logan was miles off of his teammate. He finally got equal parts to Alex, and everyone was like, "Here we go, Logan, time to show your worth." And then he was terrible. It was a terrible weekend for the team. The whole team was bad. I think it's interesting that this was, Spain is still the testing track. It has every aspect you could want in a track to see if your car is going to be good or not. And Williams took this approach to make their car more balanced, and they were the slowest team on the grid. And so, I don't know if this was them taking a step backwards to take a step forward in the future, but at the moment, things are not looking great for Williams. Terrible weekend from them, and they are for sure my back marker this weekend. And finally, my bold predictions for the weekend. As you know, I am leading Brandon in the standings, but this weekend was not a good performance for me. My first bold prediction was that Daniel Ricciardo would outqualify Yuki Tsunoda. That didn't happen. It was very close. There was under 100th of a second between them. But he did not outqualify Yuki. He did outperform him in the race, so maybe I can argue half a point of that. I'll ask Brandon. You guys can let me know in the comments. But yeah, didn't get the point on that one. My second bold prediction was that one of the top six drivers would DNF. I defined top six as McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari, And yeah, that didn't happen. There was actually no DNFs. Everyone finished for the second year in a row at the Spanish Grand Prix. Everyone finished. There weren't even any yellow flags, and that happened last year as well. Part of me thinks that that was on purpose because when Alex Albon went off into the gravel, that should have been a yellow flag, but we're like 4 laps from the end. It hadn't happened. Part of me was like, you guys have to wait until it's absolutely necessary to throw a yellow so we could have that 2 years in a row. Yeah, so I actually got the exact opposite of that happening. But Oscar Piastri and Sergio Perez finished outside the top six, so maybe I can argue half a point on that as well. I don't think Brandon's going to give that to me, but I'll give it a shot. All right, that is all we have got for this episode of the Podium Pusher podcast. Thank you guys so much for watching or listening. We truly appreciate each and every one of you who decide to make us a part of your love for Formula One. If you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you are listening or watching this podcast. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, all of the podcast platforms. You can find us there. We're there waiting for you. Got lots of content. It'll always be free, so you can hit that subscribe button. Helps us out. No cost to you at all. We truly appreciate all of your support. We will see you in the next episode of the Podium Pusher podcast later this week to predict the Austrian Grand Prix. We will see you there. See ya.